The spring we sold our house, my agent came down with something the week of the open house, and I told her not to worry about it. I just run the thing myself. Set out the flyers, unlock the door, be pleasant. That was the whole job as far as I could see it, and it was going to save us her fee on top. So I unlocked my own front door on a Saturday afternoon, and I stood in my own hallway, and I let the whole town walk through the rooms where we slept. Every single person who came in that day was allowed to be there, including him. An open house is a strange thing when you actually say it out loud, or it was to me anyway, standing in the middle of one. 30-odd people I had never met going through our bedrooms, opening the closets to see how deep they run, turning the taps on, checking the water pressure in the shower. There's a sheet by the door where they're meant to write a name, and about half of them did, and nobody checked one of those names against anything, because that isn't what the sheet is for. The sheet is so the agent can call people on Monday. And most of it was exactly as dull as it sounds. A couple measuring the kitchen with a tape. A man who wanted to talk about the roof for 20 minutes. 2 women I'm fairly sure just liked looking at houses on Saturdays. I handed out flyers and answered questions about the furnace, and I was pleased with myself, honestly, because it was busy. And busy meant offers. There was one man I noticed, and I want to be fair about how little there was to notice. Ordinary build, ordinary jacket, 40s maybe, said hello, polite, didn't sign the sheet, but plenty didn't. The only reason he registered with me at all is that he went through the back guest room twice. Once in the first wave with everybody else, and then again later on his own, once the house had thinned out. I came up the hall to see if anyone needed me, and he was standing at that guest room window with his back to the door, and he wasn't looking out of it. I could see that from the hallway. His head was down. Both hands were up on the frame. Both thumbs were on the little latch at the top of the lower sash, working it, slow and careful, the way a man works on a watch. I said something, "Hello, can I help?" And he turned around perfectly easy, said the yard was nice, said the light in that room was good, and he walked past me and out my front door and thanked me for my time. And I let it go, not because I didn't clock it. It sat somewhere at the back of my head for the rest of the afternoon. But people touch everything at an open house. They open cabinets, they flush toilets. Somebody that same day pulled the cover off my thermostat. A man fiddling with a window latch is nothing at all. It's less than nothing. So I locked up at 5 and made a pot of coffee and told my wife we'd had a good day. That night I did the round I always did. Front door, deadbolt. Back door, deadbolt. Bar in the slider track. And I walked the windows the way you walk the windows, which is to say, I looked at them. The guest room one looked shut. The latch was sitting in its keeper the way it's supposed to sit. It read locked from the doorway, and it read locked from 3 feet away. So I turned the light off and went to bed in a house with 3 people asleep in it and a sign in the yard. It was somewhere past 2 when I woke up, and I woke up already listening. There's a sound an old wooden sash makes coming up out of a sill. It isn't a bang, it's a groan, low and dry, wood dragging on wood, and then a small knock as it clears the frame. I'd heard that sound 1,000 times in that house. I'd heard it that same afternoon with people standing in the room, and I was hearing it now, at 2 in the morning, from the back guest room. And it kept going. It didn't stop. I kept lying there waiting for it to stop, and it didn't. The frame came up slow, an inch and then another, the way a man lifts a window when he doesn't want it to squeal. He wasn't shoving it, he was easing it, with the weight taken in his hands. The curtain moved. I heard the curtain move. Cold air came down my hallway. Somebody who did not live in my house was standing in my flower bed opening my window, and it was going up without one bit of trouble. I hit the hall light and then the guest room light, and I made noise doing it. I didn't shout, and I didn't go anywhere near that window. I just turned the whole house on, and the sash came back down. It didn't drop though, it was set, lowered the whole way into the sill with two hands on it. Quiet, the way you'd close a door in a house where somebody's sleeping. And then footsteps went off through the side yard, and they weren't running, they were walking. I stood in that room a long time before I touched anything. Then I went and looked at the latch, and it was sitting a quarter turn shy of its slot. Resting in the keeper is what it was doing, resting in it without ever once having gone into it, which from any distance at all looks exactly like a locked window and lifts with two fingers. It took until the sun came up for the whole shape of it to arrive, and when it did, I sat down on the stairs. Nobody broke into my house. The way in was made at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, in a room with people in it, by a man standing at a window with his thumbs on a latch, while I was 40 feet down the hall telling somebody about the furnace. And then there's the part that has never sat right, which took me a lot longer, and which I still turn over. There were 3 cars in that driveway. The front of the house had lights on until nearly midnight. Anyone standing on that street could see there were people home. He came anyway. He came on the night the house was full and 3 of us were asleep in it. And a man who eases a sash up an inch at a time so it won't squeal is a man who knows exactly who is sleeping on the other side of that wall and is being careful of them. I have never come up with a good reason for any of it, only bad ones. The officers came out and were decent about it. Nothing was broken, nothing was taken, nobody got inside. And the only record I had of who'd been in my home that day was 1 sheet of paper with 15 first names on it, written by the people themselves. We sold it a month later. I put 2 screws through that sash first, which the buyers must have thought was strange, and I never explained it, and I felt bad about that for years. I was friendly to everybody who came through that house on the Saturday, and one of the people I was friendly to spent his afternoon making himself a way back in, and I held the door for him on his way out and told him to enjoy his weekend. I'm not going to pretend I came out of it wiser, but we sold another house a long time after, and when that agent asked whether I wanted to sit the open house myself and save the fee, I said no. I took my wife and her sister out for the whole day, and we had a long lunch and didn't talk about it once. And I paid that woman every penny to stand in my hallway instead of me. It's the best money I have ever spent on anything. I bought my first house at 31, on a street where the trees meet over the road. The man I bought it from had lived in it for 31 years himself, which I thought was a lovely coincidence at the time. He was in his 70s, soft-spoken, wore a cardigan to the closing, shook my hand with both of his, told me the lilacs down the north side had been his wife's, and asked me, please, not to take them out. I promised him I wouldn't, and I meant it. The walkthrough took an hour and a half because he wanted to show me everything. Which breaker did what, which shutoff you turned first, where the crawl space hatch was. He was proud of it. And that same afternoon, before a single box came off the truck, I had a locksmith come out and change every lock in the place. Not because of him. My dad had said it twice on the phone, and I did it to stop him saying it a third time. I remember feeling rude about it, actually. Standing in that driveway watching a man drill out the old cylinders while the lilacs were coming in. 2.5 weeks later, there was a knock, mid-morning, bright out, and it was him. Standing on my step with his hand out, and in his hand, a key. It had turned up in a drawer at his daughter's place, he said, in with the batteries and the takeout menus. Said he didn't like the idea of it floating around. Handed it to me. It was warm from his pocket. I said, "Thank you," because what else is there? I asked how he was settling in. He said, "Fine." And he looked past me down the hall while he said it. 11 days after that, another one. Same knock, same time of day, sun full on the porch. Found another, side door of the garage, forgot that one existed. And this time he didn't hand it over and go. He stood in the doorway. Not inside. He never came inside. He never once asked to. He stood on the sill with the door open against my hand, and he talked for about 4 minutes. And for all 4 of them, his eyes were over my shoulder. He said I'd kept the hall runner. He said the radiator in the front room knocks if you don't bleed it in October. He wasn't talking to me. He was looking at his house. The third one came on a Saturday, and he didn't lead with the key. He stood on the step and told me my porch light was on. It was. I'd left it burning since the night before. Then he told me the switch for it isn't the one by the front door. It's the second switch in the kitchen, the one that looks like it does nothing. He was right. I had been using a lamp in that hallway for 2.5 weeks because I couldn't find the switch for the ceiling. Then he put the key in my hand. Found it in a coat, he said. There were 5 in the end, 5 keys in 6 weeks, and never the same day and never the same hour. A Tuesday morning, then 11 days, then a Saturday, then 4 days after that. I kept them in a coffee mug on the counter. 5 keys, for a house with 3 doors on it, all 3 with brand new locks in them since the day I got the deed. And somewhere around the 4th one, I did the arithmetic, standing right at that counter. Every key he brought me was a key that had been somewhere for years. In a coat pocket, in a drawer at his daughter's, on a hook in a garage he doesn't own anymore. The keys themselves weren't the problem. None of them worked. They hadn't worked since my first afternoon. It was that he kept finding them. Nobody finds 5 keys. You find one. 5 is a man going home and looking. So I stopped opening the door. The first time was a Thursday. I was at the sink with my hands in the water, and his shape came up onto the glass. 2 knocks, then a wait, then my name once, friendly the way you'd call somebody in from a yard. And I didn't move. I stood there with the tap running over my wrists and let a man say my name to my front door and did not answer him. And then I heard the storm door open. And under it, so quiet I nearly talked myself out of it, a key going into my lock. It didn't turn. Of course it didn't turn. And he tried it again, patient, unhurried, with a little back and forth to it, exactly the way you work a key you think has only gone stiff. And then he stopped. He didn't rattle it. He didn't knock again. He just stopped, like a man crossing something off. And then the footsteps went off the porch. And they didn't go down the walk. They went left, along the side of the house, past the gate, past the lilacs, at the unbothered pace of a man crossing his own yard toward a door he has used 10,000 times. I went the other way through my own house, through the front room, through the kitchen, and I got to that back door about 2 seconds ahead of him. I never touched the handle. I put my thumb on the deadbolt and turned it over, and it dropped with a clunk you could hear through the glass. And I know he heard it because he stopped right there on the step. Then the door moved. Twice. Not a rattle. 2 solid pushes into the frame. Up at the top corner, the weight of a man leaning on a door in one particular place. And then his voice came through the glass, as pleasant as it had ever been on my front step. "You've got to lift it. It drops in the summer." And then he went. Down the side, out through the gate, and I heard a car start somewhere up the street. I had never opened that door, not once in 6 weeks. It went out to a strip of grass in a bin, and I'd never had a reason. I went out there the next morning with the sun on everything. I turned the bolt back and I pulled the handle, and it did not move. I pulled harder. Nothing. And then I put my hand underneath and picked the whole door up, half an inch maybe, and it swung open as easy as anything in the world. I called the police the week after, and the officer was kind and wrote all of it down. A man returns keys in the daytime. Nothing is broken, nothing is taken. He has never set foot inside my home in his life. What they could do was serve him a warning, which means an officer drives out to that man's new address, stands on his porch, and says my name to him out loud. I thought about that for a week before I said no. He still lives 3 streets over. I see the car. I've been behind him in line at the hardware store. He nods. He's perfectly pleasant, and he's never come back. I don't know whether that's the deadbolt or the police almost being involved or something else entirely. I've stopped trying to decide. I still live here. I kept the lilacs the way I said I would. There's a proper bolt on that back door now, through the frame, the kind you can only throw from the inside. And the 5 keys are still in the mug on the counter. My sister says that's morbid, and I should have thrown them in the lake months ago. Maybe she's right, but those are 5 keys to my house that spent years in a drawer in somebody else's kitchen. And I know about those 5 for one reason. He decided to bring me those 5. Nobody has ever counted the ones he didn't. So I keep them where I can see them. And I count them more often than I'd admit to anybody. I'd been renting the same small house about 6 months when my landlord told me he was putting it on the market. He was decent about it as far as it went. Showings would be by appointment. 24 hours notice every time. And I didn't have to leave the house if I didn't want to. All of which was true, and all of which turned out to have almost nothing to do with what happened. 2 days later, the agent came out with a sign for the yard in a small gray steel box. And she hung the box on my front door, on the handle, at eye level, on the door I lock behind me every night of my life. I should say I knew perfectly well what it was. I'd been walking past them on other people's houses my whole life and had never once thought about one. It's a lockbox and there's a key inside it. The key to that door. It opens on a 4-number combination, and the second it's open, whoever is standing there is holding a key to the house I sleep in. I asked the obvious question while she was still on the step. Who has the code? And she was lovely about it and completely vague. Just agents. It's a professional courtesy. There's a whole system. And I didn't push it. I could have pushed it. It was 2 days in and I was the tenant, and I badly wanted to be easy to deal with. I've thought about that a lot since. The first few showings went exactly as advertised. A text the day before, and I'd go get a coffee and sit in it for an hour and come back to a house that was fine. Not untouched, fine. Closet doors standing open. A light left on in the back room I never use. The shower curtain pulled to one side. Small nothings that only meant strangers had been through, which was the arrangement, and I'd agreed to the arrangement. Then it started slipping. A car in the driveway on a day that had no appointment on it. A neighbor mentioning she'd waved at the people looking at my place on a Wednesday I'd had no text about. I asked the agent and she said a colleague may have popped by. Popped by. That was the phrase. And I stood in my kitchen working out what that phrase actually described, which is a man I have never met taking a key off my door, letting himself into my home, and hanging the key back up on his way out. It was a Tuesday, about 8 in the evening, and there was nothing at all special about it. It was still light out. My car was in the driveway. My shoes were by the door. I had the TV going and a plate on my knees. And I heard the box. You learn the sound of it after a few weeks. The small, dry clicks of the dial coming round, and then the shell of the thing dropping open on its hinge and knocking against the door. And then my deadbolt turned from the outside. I've had to describe that sound a few times since, and I always make it bigger than it was. It wasn't a knock, and nobody was trying a handle. It was the bolt itself sliding back out of the frame. The exact sound I made with my own hand every night of my life, happening without me while I sat 8 feet away holding a plate. The door came open, and there were 3 men standing in my entryway. Grown men, coats on. One of them already past the mat, looking down my hallway. One with the key still in his hand. The third holding my door open with his foot. And there was no agent with them. Nobody on this earth knew those 3 men were in that house, except them, and now me. I came out of the front room saying something. I don't remember what. That I live here, that this is my house. And what came back at me was not shock. Not one of them jumped. Not one of them apologized the way a person apologizes when they've walked into somebody's home by mistake. The one with the key said they had the 7:30. The one in my hallway said, "Oh, they didn't tell us anybody was in." And he said it while he was still looking at my stairs. He looked at my stairs for another 1.5 seconds before he looked at me. And then they left, and they left the way they'd come in. No hurry, no embarrassment. The one with the key put it back in the box, closed the shell, spun the dial with his thumb, and then pulled my front door shut behind him and gave it a push to make sure it caught. They locked my house up on their way out, like they were doing me a favor. I called the agent that night, and she was genuinely thrown, and every single thing she told me made it worse. There was no 7:30. There was nothing on the calendar for that day at all. No colleague of hers, no client of hers. The description didn't match anybody in her office. And when I asked her to come and take the box off my door in the morning, she went quiet in a way I understood before she said a word. Because the box isn't mine, and neither is the lock it opens. So the only honest answer to how many people could walk into my house was that nobody had ever counted, and nobody was going to start. I asked her again to change the code, and she said the same thing she'd said on the first day, in the same warm voice. Only realtors have access. My landlord's position was simpler. He was selling. Showings had to be easy. He wasn't going to make his own house harder to get into. And the lease said I couldn't change the locks, which I read 4 separate times looking for a way through it. The police came out and took a report and were straight with me, which I'd rather have than kind. 3 men used a key that hangs on that door in order to be used. I had no names to give them. Nothing was taken, nothing was damaged, nobody touched me. And if the 3 of them did turn out to be agents after all, then the man who owns that door had already said yes on their behalf, months earlier, in a conversation I was never in the room for. I stopped checking the door at night after that. There's no point checking a door that a key opens. What I checked was the box. I go out on the step before bed with a flashlight and stand there turning this little gray thing over on my own handle, looking at 4 numbers that told me nothing. Because a combination box looks precisely the same whether it was opened 40 minutes ago or never at all. I moved out 6 weeks early and ate the money, and I have never regretted a bill less. The box was still hanging on that handle the morning I loaded the truck. It was there when I dropped the keys through the slot. I never found out who those 3 men were. I asked twice more and got, "I'll look into that," both times, and then the house sold, and there was nobody left to ask. Somewhere out there are 3 people who spent a Tuesday evening standing in my front hall and went home thinking the worst thing that had happened to them that night was a scheduling mix-up. The last thing I did in that house was stupid, and I'd do it again. I stood on the step with the truck running, and I closed that box and spun the dial, because I couldn't stand to leave it hanging open for whoever moved in next. I rent across town now. Plain door, my lock, one key, nothing hanging on the handle. And I know exactly how many people can open my front door, which is one, and it took me the best part of a year to stop finding that remarkable. I never learned the names of the 3 men in my hallway, and I've made a kind of peace with that. It's whoever passed 4 numbers along and never once had to know who was standing behind them that I still think about. And let's never meet. 3 houses, and not one of them was broken into. A man with his thumbs on a window latch on a Saturday afternoon in a room full of people, while the owner stood down the hall being a good host. A gentleman in a cardigan handing back a 5th key in the sunshine, who turned out to know a door in that house better than the woman who had bought it. And 3 strangers in a rented front hall at 8 in the evening, holding a key that was hung there on purpose by people who had every right to hang it. Nobody forced a thing. Nobody had to. Every one of them was let in by the deal itself, in daylight, with everybody involved being perfectly polite about it. So before you close the tab, sit with the quiet question. Of those 3, the visitor who left himself a window, the old owner who kept turning up with keys, the men who already had one, which one would have gotten you? Which one would you have smiled at on the way out, or opened the door for one more time, or signed off on because it was in the paperwork and everybody said it was normal? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe so the next one gets to you before you hand out a set of keys. And the next time somebody has a reason to be in your home that has nothing to do with you, have a look at what they're standing next to when they think nobody is watching.